On March 7, 1969, in a converted boat repair warehouse on the south end of Alameda Island, across the estuary from Oakland, California, a man named Tariq Khalil did something that no one had done to Bruce Lee in 4 years. He hit him, clean, full contact, a right cross that landed flush on the left side of Bruce Lee's jaw and sent him sideways into the rope barrier so hard that the oil drum anchoring the corner tipped and rolled 3 feet across the concrete floor. 14 people were in that warehouse. Not one of them made a sound. Because the sound had already been made. The sound was the crack of knuckle against bone, and it echoed off the corrugated metal walls and the stacked crab traps and the rusted winch chains hanging from the ceiling. And it hung in the air the way a gunshot hangs in the air, not fading so much as settling, pressing itself into the memory of everyone who heard it. Bruce Lee touched his jaw. He moved it side to side. He looked at Tariq Khalil, and the expression on his face was not anger. It was not pain. It was something far more dangerous than either of those things. It was interest. Tariq Khalil was 26 years old. He stood 6 feet 1 inch tall and weighed 193 pounds. He was a black man from Detroit who had grown up in the Brewster-Douglass housing projects on the east side, where his father worked the line at the Chrysler-Jefferson assembly plant and his mother cleaned rooms at the Book Cadillac Hotel downtown. He had started boxing at 13 at the Kronk Recreation Center 4 years before Emanuel Stewart arrived and turned it into the most famous boxing gym in America. By 18, Tariq had an amateur record of 22 wins and 1 loss. The loss was a split decision in the Golden Gloves regional semi-final to a southpaw from Cleveland who outweighed him by 14 pounds. Tariq believed to his grave that he won that fight. He was probably right. But Tariq Khalil did not become a professional boxer. In 1963, 2 weeks before his 20th birthday, he watched a man named Jhoon Rhee perform a demonstration at a community center in Dearborn. Rhee broke 4 boards with a spinning back kick, and something in Tariq's understanding of what a human body could do shifted permanently. He walked up to Rhee afterward and said, "I can hit harder than you." Rhee looked at him and said, "Probably, but can you hit faster?" Tariq had no answer. He enrolled in Rhee's Taekwondo class the following week. Within 2 years, Tariq Khalil had combined his boxing footwork and hand speed with Taekwondo's kicking arsenal in a way that no one in the Midwest tournament circuit had seen before. He won the 1965 Michigan State Open. He won the 1966 Great Lakes Invitational. He won the 1967 All-American Karate Championship in Oklahoma City, defeating an Okinawan stylist in the final with a lead jab followed by a roundhouse kick to the body that his opponent later said felt like being hit by a car door. By 1968, Tariq Khalil had a competitive record of 41 wins, 0 losses, and a reputation that had begun to travel westward through the network of martial arts schools and tournaments and late-night phone calls that connected fighters across the country in the years before anyone had thought to put them in a cage. The phone call that led to the warehouse on Alameda Island came from a man named George Fong. Fong ran a small kung fu school in San Francisco's Chinatown and had connections to the informal challenge match circuit that operated in the Bay Area in the late 1960s. These were not tournaments. There were no referees, no trophies, no audience beyond the people who were invited, and the invitations were not written down. You heard about a match the way you heard about a card game or a house party. Someone told someone who told someone, and if you were the right kind of person, you showed up at the right address at the right time, and you watched 2 men test each other in a space that smelled like motor oil and seawater and sweat. George Fong had heard about Tariq Khalil from a student who had attended the Oklahoma City tournament. He had also heard from multiple sources that Tariq was openly claiming he could beat any martial artist alive, regardless of style, regardless of size, regardless of fame. Fong called a man named James Yim Lee in Oakland. James Lee called Bruce. Bruce agreed in 4 words: when and where. Now here is the part of this story that matters, not the fight. The fight matters, but it is not the part that matters most. The part that matters most is what happened in the 31 hours between the moment Bruce Lee's jaw was struck and the moment he walked through the doors of Highland Hospital in Oakland carrying a paper bag and asked a nurse on the 3rd floor for the room number of a patient named Tariq Khalil. But before we get to the hospital, you need to understand what happened in that warehouse. All of it. Because the fight between Bruce Lee and Tariq Khalil was not like the other challenge matches. It was not fast. It was not clean. It was not a demonstration of superiority. It was a conversation conducted in violence, and like all real conversations, it changed both men who participated in it. The warehouse was cold. March in Alameda, near the water, the temperature drops into the mid-40s after sunset, and the sun had set 2 hours ago. The space was approximately 40 feet by 60 feet, with a makeshift ring marked by ropes strung between 4 oil drums. The floor was bare concrete, swept but not clean. A single row of metal folding chairs lined one wall. The lighting came from 2 caged industrial fixtures mounted on the ceiling beams, casting a hard, flat, shadowless light that made everything look like a photograph taken with too much flash. 14 people sat or stood along the periphery. George Fong, James Yim Lee, a photographer named Dennis Ho who had been told he could take pictures but not use a flash. 2 of Tariq's training partners who had driven with him from Detroit in a 1964 Ford Galaxy 500, a woman named Mei Ling who worked at George Fong's school and served as an unofficial timekeeper, 8 others whose names were never recorded and whose faces Dennis Ho never photographed because his camera jammed after the 3rd frame and he spent the rest of the evening watching with his mouth open. Bruce arrived at 8:15 p.m. He wore a plain white t-shirt, dark cotton pants, and lightweight canvas shoes. No hand wraps, no mouthguard. He shook hands with George Fong, nodded at James Lee, and looked across the room at Tariq Khalil. Tariq was warming up in the far corner, shadow boxing, and even from 40 feet away, Bruce could see it. The hands. Tariq's hands moved the way a professional boxer's hands move, which is to say, they moved with a precision and economy that most martial artists never achieve because most martial artists have never been punched in the face by someone who does it for a living. The jab was compact, the cross was straight, the hooks were tight, and between the punches Tariq's feet were doing something unusual. They were not shuffling in the flat parallel pattern of a Western boxer. They were angling, rotating, creating lines that did not exist in boxing's geometry. The Taekwondo had been absorbed into his movement so completely that it no longer looked like Taekwondo. It looked like something new. Bruce watched for approximately 90 seconds, then he looked at James Lee and said quietly, "He's real." James Lee said, "I told you. You told me he was good. You did not tell me he was real. There is a difference." They met in the center of the roped area at 8:22 p.m. No one spoke. There was no signal. They looked at each other, and then they began. The first 40 seconds were measurement. Both men moved laterally, circling in opposite directions, neither committing. Bruce's stance was low, bladed, left hand forward, right hand chambered near his ribs. Tariq stood taller, more upright, orthodox boxing stance with his weight slightly farther back than a pure boxer would carry it, a concession to the kicking range he wanted to maintain. At the 41-second mark, Bruce threw his first technique, a lead hand finger jab aimed at Tariq's eyes. It was fast, inhumanly fast, the kind of fast that made audiences gasp at demonstrations and reporters scramble for adjectives. But Tariq did not gasp. He slipped the jab by moving his head 2 inches to the right, the way a boxer slips a jab, because that is what the jab was to him. It was a jab. It came from the front hand. It traveled in a straight line, and he had been slipping straight lines since he was 13 years old in a basement on Wilkins Street in Detroit. Bruce reset, and for the first time in the evening, his expression changed. Not a smile, not a frown, a slight narrowing of the eyes. An adjustment of the aperture through which he was observing this man. The exchange that followed lasted approximately 6 seconds and contained more technical information than most fights contain in 6 rounds. Bruce threw a low side kick to Tariq's lead knee. Tariq checked it by lifting his shin. Bruce converted the kick into a step and threw a back fist. Tariq ducked it. Tariq threw a jab. Bruce parried it. Tariq threw the cross. Bruce slipped it. Tariq threw a roundhouse kick to Bruce's midsection. Bruce intercepted it with his forearm and countered with a straight rear punch to Tariq's sternum. The punch landed. Tariq absorbed it, stepped back, and reset. Both men were breathing through their noses. Neither had been hurt, but something had been established. A frequency, a wavelength. These 2 men were operating at the same speed, and that was something Bruce Lee had not experienced in a very long time. The right cross came at the 2-minute and 14-second mark. Later, James Yim Lee would describe it as the single best punch he had ever seen anyone land on Bruce. Not the hardest, the best, because of its construction. Tariq set it up with 3 jabs, each one thrown at a slightly different angle and a slightly different speed, creating a rhythm that was designed to be broken. Bruce picked up the rhythm and began parrying in time with it. On the 4th beat, where the 4th jab should have been, Tariq threw the cross. It came from a line Bruce was not defending because the pattern had told his reflexes to expect a jab. The right hand traveled 11 inches and landed on the left side of Bruce Lee's jaw with the full rotation of Tariq's hips behind it. Bruce went sideways, the oil drum tipped, the rope sagged. 14 people stopped breathing. Bruce caught himself on the rope. He did not go down. His left hand gripped the rope. His right hand touched his jaw. He stood there for perhaps 2 seconds, and in those 2 seconds, something happened behind his eyes that Mei Ling, the timekeeper, would later describe as the most frightening thing she had ever witnessed, not because of violence, because of calculation. She said it looked like watching a machine recalibrate. Every assumption Bruce Lee had carried into that warehouse was being disassembled and rebuilt in real time, and the man who stood up from the rope was not the same man who had been hit. What happened next lasted approximately 4 minutes, and it was, by every account of every person present, the most extraordinary display of martial arts any of them had ever seen. Not because Bruce Lee dominated Tariq Khalil. He did not. Not because Bruce Lee brutalized Tariq Khalil. He did not do that either. It was extraordinary because for 4 minutes, 2 men who had spent their entire lives perfecting the art of combat operated at a level that erased the boundaries between their styles and became something that had no name. Bruce changed everything. His stance widened, his hands dropped. He stopped using classical Wing Chun structure entirely and began fighting in a way that borrowed Tariq's own rhythm, mirroring his timing, matching his cadence, and then breaking it with techniques that came from angles Tariq had never seen, because they did not exist in any system Tariq had studied. Bruce threw elbows from trapping range. He used oblique kicks to Tariq's knees that disrupted his footwork. He closed distance with a burst that was neither a lunge nor a step, but something between the two, a compression of space that put him inside Tariq's reach before Tariq's hands could adjust. But Tariq did not fold. That is the part that no one who tells this story understands unless they were there. Tariq Khalil absorbed everything Bruce Lee gave him and kept fighting. He bled from a cut above his left eyebrow where an elbow had opened the skin. His left knee was compromised from the oblique kicks, and he had shifted his weight to his right leg, which reduced his kicking power but did not eliminate it. He landed 2 more clean punches on Bruce during those 4 minutes, a left hook to the body that made Bruce exhale sharply through his teeth, and an uppercut that grazed Bruce's chin and snapped his head back 1.5 inches. At the 6-minute and 30-second mark, Bruce Lee ended the fight. Not with a punch, not with a kick, with a sweep. He hooked Tariq's compromised left leg at the ankle, pulled it forward, and simultaneously pushed Tariq's chest with a palm strike that was not powerful enough to cause damage but was precisely powerful enough to break his balance. Tariq went down, his back hit the concrete, the air left his lungs, and before he could move, Bruce Lee was standing over him with his right fist chambered 6 inches from Tariq's face. He did not throw it. He held it there for 3 seconds. Looking down at Tariq Khalil with an expression that was not triumph and was not pity and was not anything that anyone in that room could put a word to because the word for it did not exist in English or Cantonese or any language spoken by the 14 people in that warehouse. Then Bruce Lee extended his hand. Tariq looked at the hand. He looked at the fist that was no longer chambered. He looked at Bruce Lee's face, and he took the hand. Bruce pulled him to his feet. They stood facing each other. Close enough to feel each other's breath. Bruce said something that only Tariq heard. The words were spoken so quietly that even James Lee, standing 8 feet away, could not make them out. Tariq nodded, once, and then they separated. That was the end of the fight, but it was not the end of the story, because the story did not live in the warehouse. The story lived in what happened next. Tariq Khalil did not leave the warehouse under his own power. His left knee, which had been absorbing oblique kicks for 4 minutes, gave out 17 minutes after the fight ended, while he was sitting in a folding chair drinking water from a paper cup. The knee swelled to twice its normal size within an hour. His training partners drove him to Highland Hospital in Oakland, where an emergency room physician diagnosed a torn lateral collateral ligament and a bone bruise on the tibial plateau. He was admitted overnight. Surgery was not required, but he was told he would not walk without crutches for 6 weeks and would not kick for 4 months. Bruce Lee did not know this. He left the warehouse at approximately 8:50 p.m., 20 minutes after the fight. He drove back to his home in the Crestmont area of Oakland with James Yim Lee. According to James, Bruce said nothing during the drive. He sat in the passenger seat with his window down, the cold Alameda night air filling the car, and he stared at the road with the focus of a man who is not seeing the road at all, but is seeing something else entirely, something internal, something that is being rearranged. At home, Bruce did not sleep. Linda was already in bed. Brandon, not yet 4 years old, was asleep in his room. Bruce sat at his desk in the small study off the living room and opened a notebook. He wrote for 3 hours. He did not write about the fight. He wrote about the rhythm, about the way Tariq had used 3 jabs to create a pattern and then broken the pattern with the cross, about the way rhythm could be weaponized, about the way his own training had conditioned him to read patterns, and the way a truly great fighter could exploit that conditioning by building a false pattern and detonating it. He filled 9 pages. At the top of the first page, he wrote a single sentence that James Lee would later find when sorting through Bruce's papers. A pattern is a prison, even a pattern of victory. The next morning, March 8th, Bruce asked James Lee what had happened to the boxer from Detroit. James told him about the knee, about Highland Hospital, about the 6 weeks on crutches. Bruce said nothing for several minutes. Then he asked where Highland Hospital was. James told him. Then James asked, why? Bruce said, because he earned it. James did not understand the answer. He would not understand it for years. He assumed Bruce meant that Tariq had earned respect, and that was part of it, but it was not the whole of it. What Tariq Khalil had earned, in Bruce Lee's estimation, was something rarer than respect. He had earned recognition. The recognition that comes when one craftsman encounters another and sees, in the other's work, a quality that cannot be taught or bought or borrowed. It can only be built, slowly, over years, through repetition and pain and the particular kind of loneliness that comes from pursuing mastery in a discipline that most people will never understand. Bruce drove to Highland Hospital at 10:40 a.m. on March 8, 1969. He carried a brown paper bag. He parked in the visitor's lot on East 31st Street. He walked through the main entrance, took the stairs to the 3rd floor, and asked a nurse for the room number of a patient named Tariq Khalil. The nurse gave him the number. Room 312. Bruce walked down the corridor. The floor was linoleum. The walls were pale green. The light was the particular kind of fluorescent light that exists only in hospitals, the kind that makes everything look slightly too real, slightly too visible, as though the world has been stripped of the soft edges that make it comfortable to look at. He stopped at the door of room 312. It was open. He could see inside. Tariq Khalil was lying on the bed with his left leg elevated on 2 pillows, wrapped in bandages from mid-thigh to ankle. He was staring at the ceiling. He was alone. Bruce knocked on the doorframe. Tariq turned his head. He looked at Bruce Lee standing in the doorway of his hospital room at 10:40 in the morning, holding a brown paper bag, and his face went through 4 expressions in approximately 2 seconds. Surprise, confusion, wariness, and then something else. Something that settled over his features the way calm settles over water after a stone has been thrown in and the ripples have run their course. I didn't expect you, Tariq said. I didn't expect your right hand, Bruce said. So we are even. Tariq almost smiled. Almost. The corner of his mouth moved a 1/4 inch and stopped. Bruce walked into the room. He set the paper bag on the bedside table. Inside the bag were 2 items. A container of wonton soup from a Chinese restaurant on 8th Street in Oakland's Chinatown, and a book. The book was The Book of 5 Rings by Miyamoto Musashi, a 17th century Japanese swordsman who had fought over 60 duels and never lost. The soup is for today, Bruce said. The book is for the 6 weeks. Tariq looked at the bag. He looked at Bruce. You didn't have to come. I know. Then why did you? Bruce sat down in the molded plastic chair beside the bed. He did not answer immediately. He looked at Tariq's bandaged leg. He looked at the window, which faced east, toward the Oakland hills, where the morning light was turning the eucalyptus trees silver green. Last night, Bruce said, you hit me with a right cross that I did not see coming. I have been training for 14 years. I have fought in streets, in gyms, in studios, in parking lots, on rooftops, in basements. I have fought men who outweighed me by 100 pounds. I have fought men who have been training since before I was born, and in 14 years, no one has constructed a punch the way you constructed that punch. 3 jabs to build the rhythm. The 4th beat left empty, the cross through the space where my parry was already committed. That is not boxing, that is not Taekwondo, that is architecture. You built a structure and I walked into it. Tariq said nothing. He was listening, not the way most people listen, which is to say, waiting for their turn to speak. He was listening the way a musician listens to another musician play, with his whole body. I went home last night and I wrote 9 pages about what you did, Bruce said. 9 pages. I have not written 9 pages about a single exchange since my fight with Wong Jack Man in 1964. You gave me something last night that I cannot get from my students. I cannot get it from my training. I cannot get it from films or books or demonstrations. You gave me a problem I had not solved, and a problem I have not solved is the most valuable thing anyone can give me. Tariq looked at the ceiling again. Then he looked at Bruce. I've been fighting since I was 13, he said. I've won 41 matches, no losses. Last night I lost to you in 6.5 minutes. My knee is torn. I won't kick for 4 months. And you're sitting here telling me I gave you a gift. You did. How does losing give you a gift? You did not lose. You were defeated. There is a difference. Losing is what happens when you are not prepared. Being defeated is what happens when you are prepared and someone finds the answer to your preparation. One is failure, the other is information. What happened to you last night was information, and the information is this. You are one adjustment away from being the most dangerous fighter I have ever faced. The room went quiet. The fluorescent light hummed. Somewhere down the hallway, a cart with a squeaky wheel rolled past. One adjustment, Tariq said. One. What is it? Bruce looked at him, and then Bruce Lee, a man who had spent his entire adult life developing a martial art based on the principle of absorbing what is useful and discarding what is useless, a man who guarded his techniques with an intensity that bordered on obsession, a man who had been accused by the traditional martial arts community of stealing techniques and by his own students of withholding them, told Tariq Khalil exactly what the adjustment was. He told him about the stance, about the way Tariq's boxing stance, upright and square-shouldered, created a target line that was too wide when he transitioned from punching to kicking. He told him about the half-beat, about the way Tariq committed to his kicks with his full body weight, which gave them devastating power but left a gap of approximately 0.3 of a second during the recovery in which his balance was compromised. He told him about the oblique kick, the technique Bruce had used to attack the knee, and he explained that the only defense against it was not to check it, but to withdraw the leg entirely, which meant changing the kicking stance from a planted platform to a floating one. He spent 45 minutes in that hospital room. He drew diagrams on the back of a hospital menu. He stood up and demonstrated footwork patterns in the narrow space between the bed and the window. He moved the plastic chair to show angles. He talked about timing the way a jazz musician talks about time signatures, in terms of beats and rests, and the spaces between actions where the real fight takes place. Tariq watched. He listened. He asked 3 questions. Each question was precise, technical, and revealed a depth of understanding that confirmed everything Bruce had suspected about him. This man was not a brawler who had gotten lucky with a right cross. This man was a scientist of combat who happened to express his science through his fists. When Bruce finished, he stood up and looked at Tariq for a long moment. Then he reached into his back pocket and took out a small piece of paper. He wrote his address and phone number on it and placed it on the bedside table next to the soup and the book. "When your knee heals," Bruce said, "call me. I want to work with you." "Work with me how?" "I want to train with you, not teach you, not spar with you. Train with you. There is a difference." "What is the difference?" "Teaching is one direction, sparring is 2 directions with limits, training is 2 directions without limits. I have students, I have sparring partners, I do not have anyone I train with, not the way I mean it." Tariq looked at the piece of paper. He looked at Bruce. "You just told me how to fix the one thing that let you beat me, and now you want to train with the version of me that you can't beat." Bruce smiled, not the movie smile, not the magazine smile, the real one. The one that appeared for a fraction of a second and vanished like a match struck in wind. "Yes," he said, "that is exactly what I want." He picked up the paper bag, took out the container of wonton soup and set it on the tray table. Eat the soup while it's warm, read the Musashi when you cannot sleep, and call me when you can stand on that leg without thinking about it. He walked to the door. He stopped. He did not turn around. Tariq. Yeah. That right cross, the way you built it, 3 beats and a silence. I have been replaying it in my head all night. It is the most honest punch I have ever received. Do not let a torn knee make you forget what your hands already know. He left. His footsteps receded down the linoleum hallway. The squeaky cart passed again. The fluorescent light hummed. Tariq Khalil lay in the hospital bed and looked at the ceiling for a long time. Then he opened the paper bag, took out the container of wonton soup, removed the lid, and ate it slowly. It was still warm. Pork and shrimp. The broth was clear and faintly sweet and tasted like someone had made it with actual attention, not the mass-produced kind, but the kind that comes from a kitchen where the cook gives a damn. When the soup was finished, he picked up the book. He opened it to the first page. There was an inscription on the inside cover, written in Bruce Lee's handwriting. It read, "To the man who reminded me that I have not finished learning. B." Tariq read that inscription 4 times. Then he closed the book, held it against his chest, and stared at the ceiling until the nurse came to check his vitals at noon. He never called the number, not because he did not want to, because his knee healed slower than projected. 4 months became 6, 6 became 8. By the time he could kick without pain, he had returned to Detroit. He resumed training. He resumed fighting. He won his next 12 matches. He incorporated every adjustment Bruce had described in that hospital room, and the fighters he faced in 1970 and 1971 encountered a version of Tariq Khalil that was fundamentally different from the one who had come before, faster in the transitions, more elusive in the stance, more unpredictable in the rhythm. He planned to call Bruce in the spring of 1972. He had the number memorized. He had rehearsed what he would say. He was going to tell Bruce that the adjustments worked, that the floating stance had eliminated the oblique kick vulnerability, that he had been training without limits, the way Bruce described it. Even though he had been training alone, he was going to say, "I am ready." He never made the call. On July 20th, 1973, Bruce Lee died in Hong Kong. He was 32 years old. Tariq Khalil heard the news on a television in the break room of the Chrysler Jefferson assembly plant, where he had taken a job on the line to supplement his income between fights. He was eating a sandwich. The news anchor said the words "martial arts star Bruce Lee" and "dead" in the same sentence, and Tariq set the sandwich down and did not pick it up again. He drove home that evening and sat in his apartment on Chain Street for 3 hours without turning on the lights. He took out the copy of The Book of 5 Rings that he had kept on his nightstand for 4 years. He opened it to the inside cover. He read the inscription, "To the man who reminded me that I have not finished learning. B." He read it 5 times. Then Tariq Khalil did something he had not done since the day he watched Jhoon Rhee break boards in Dearborn and realized that the world was larger than he had imagined. He cried, not loudly, not dramatically. The kind of crying that happens when a man who has built his life on control encounters something that control cannot manage. The kind that starts in the chest and moves upward and arrives at the eyes as a single, quiet, unstoppable fact. He cried for a man he had met twice, a man who had hit him and been hit by him, a man who had brought him soup in a paper bag and drawn diagrams on the back of a hospital menu and told him, in a fluorescent-lit room on the 3rd floor of a public hospital in Oakland, California, that a torn knee was not an ending but a doorway. Tariq Khalil fought competitively until 1978. His final record was 69 wins and 1 loss. The one loss was to Bruce Lee in a boat repair warehouse on Alameda Island on a cold night in March when the light was flat and the concrete was bare and 14 people watched 2 men discover, in the language of violence, something that resembled love. He never spoke about the fight publicly, not to reporters, not to students, not to the men he trained with in Detroit and Chicago and Cleveland in the years that followed. He kept the book. He kept the piece of paper with the address and phone number. He kept them in the top drawer of his dresser beside his father's watch and his Golden Gloves certificate and a photograph of his mother standing in front of the Book Cadillac Hotel in a white dress on Easter Sunday, 1952. He died in 2011 in a hospice in Dearborn, Michigan. He was 68 years old. His daughter found the book and the piece of paper when she was sorting through his belongings. She did not know who B was. She did not know what the inscription meant. She placed both items in a cardboard box and stored the box in her garage, where it remained untouched for 12 years. In 2023, the daughter's son, a 19-year-old community college student named Malik, found the box while looking for a set of jumper cables. He opened the book. He read the inscription. He turned the piece of paper over and read the address: 2551 Crestmont Avenue, Oakland, California. He typed the address into his phone. The search results told him it was the former home of a man named James Yim Lee, a martial artist who had been Bruce Lee's close friend and training partner in Oakland in the 1960s. Malik sat on the concrete floor of his mother's garage, holding a book that his grandfather had held in a hospital bed 54 years earlier, and he understood, for the first time, that the old man who had taught him to throw a jab in the backyard when he was 7, the quiet man who never talked about his fights, who never raised his voice, who made soup every Sunday and read the same book every night before bed, had once stood in a warehouse and hit a legend in the jaw and earned something that most people never earn in a lifetime. Not a victory, not a trophy, not a record, a visit, a bowl of soup, and 9 words in blue ink on the inside cover of a paperback book that smelled like old paper and hospital air and the faint irreducible residue of a night when 2 men, alone in a warehouse, reminded each other that the point of fighting was never to win. It was to find someone worth fighting, and then to show up the next morning with soup and say the thing that matters more than any punch ever thrown. You reminded me that I have not finished learning.